Good evening, my fellow students and Professor Richard. My name is Riza COF, and today I will be presenting about the topic of recidivism. Do any of you know what recidivism is? Are anyone aware of? Most of you? No? Recidivism is a topic that's not very common right now and not well spoken of, because it's basically people, after they go to jail, they come right back. And it's a problem we've had for years. The rates of recidivism has increased over time, and as a result, we spend more money on incarceration rather than education. We spend more money every year on correctional facilities, and we spend more money towards our prisoners rather than our education systems. Now, do any of you are any of you aware about the fact that that as of the 1980s, the prisons have become less rehabilitationary and more towards punishment? Any of you know that? Well, it has become more towards punishment, and therefore there are no programs as of the moment going towards the prisoners' betterment and going towards making them better citizens and molding them into something better when they go out back into our society. Now, tonight, my main claim is the high rate of recidivism in American prison system can be efficiently solved through the implementation of rehabilitation practices. Let me define some terms for you. Efficiently, it means with promising result, less work, and less cost. Throughout my presentation, my main points will be: first, less cost, more cost effective. That the rehabilitation practices will cost less and will provide more results. Second is that the rehabilitation practices would change the perspective of prisoners, thus giving them more opportunities in the future to do well in our society. And third, they will more likely contribute towards our society and will have more of a better output. My first point, it's more cost effective. According to a video done by PEW, which is a research company that researches trends in our society, especially in topics such as recidivism, we spend over $50 billion a year on correctional facilities alone. While as towards our education, we spend less than that. Thousands of dollars go towards correctional facilities that don't even provide towards the education of our prisoners. With the help of rehabilitation systems, they are able to talk with people and find reasoning and change their perspective towards things. PEW is working towards that. There are currently some of those rehabilitation facilities that show promises. There's therapeutic community programs that yield benefits of $1.91 to $2.69 per dollar that we spend on that specific prisoner. My second contention, rehabilitation practices would change the perspective of the prisoners. They are able to talk with these facilitators and are able to change their perspectives and actually study better. They're put into groups in which they're able to talk about their problems and talk about what they want to pursue in life. According to a prisoner, or an ex-prisoner named John Gutierrez, he's currently facilitating one of these programs. He said he does this because he was once one of them. And he knows that essentially if they want, they have a possibility of a chance, meaning that they can change, and that through these programs, people can change. The third contention, prisoners are more likely to contribute to society. Like John Gutierrez, these prisoners can contribute towards, once educated, can contribute towards our society and participate in more jobs. A lot of them, according to an article by Cristina Villacorte about the release of prisoners, most inmates do not have support from their families, friends, or anybody else out there, and therefore they're left behind with no jobs, with no facilities to help them, and they have no one there to help them. And therefore, they cannot participate and actually get jobs and get a new life and get a new opportunity. They're not educated. Most of them are probably used to the drinking and the drugs, and so they go back to it afterwards because there's no rehabilitation in the prisons themselves. As I said, my points tonight are it's more cost effective. Prisoners are most likely to change their perspective and therefore more likely to contribute to society, and therefore the rehabilitation practices, once put in, will reduce the rate of recidivism. Thank you.
All right, your proposition is clearly identified, but that comes later in the speech. It's almost 2 minutes into the speech when you get to the proposition and the preview. So there's a lot of background material, and I think you need to get through that much more efficiently and effectively so that you've got more time to develop the supporting points. You did a nice job labeling the secondary claims and then in the body of the speech identifying them as you went through that. So organizationally, you're on pretty good ground. The evidence, I think, is a little bit thin. For example, in that very first section, you asked this question about whether, or not we think rehabilitation exists, and it's like a presupposition that there is an absence of rehabilitation, that we are focusing on punishment rather than rehabilitation since the 1980s. And I think that needs some data to support it. We should have a total on the number of prisoners. We should have a total on the number of prisons that have rehabilitation programs in them so that we know how to say that it is not widespread or ineffective. The $50 billion that you cite on what we spend on prisons, it's not clear. I assume that's probably a national figure, and the idea that that represents a greater expenditure of money than we spend on education, I think, is going to be you're going to discover that that's not even close to being accurate. California spends that much money on education. So there are going to be some issues here. You're on the right track of making the argument. I just think that the proof that you have is a little bit thin. You've got the Pew Research Center that you cite on the first point, and I think that's a good idea. And their estimate about the cost effectiveness of the one program is good, although there needs to be a little bit more explanation about how that works. And the evidence, though, says it's promising. Now, I think that's a little bit different. I'm not sure that that's sufficient to show that it would produce the long-term trade-offs that you're talking about. The second point, you're really dependent on the one example, and I think it's a good example, but once again, we're in this situation, how generalizable is that example? You mentioned that many of the people who are in prisons may have suffered from drug, alcohol problems, a lack of education ahead of time, and there's not really any explanation about how effective drug alcohol programs would be in the prisons, and is that going to fix the problem afterwards? I'm not exactly sure how a rehab program in the prison addresses people's support system outside of prison. So when they get released, how is this rehab program going to benefit there? And I think that needed a little bit more clarification. Thought you did a nice job speaking to the audience, and you use your time pretty effectively as well. All right, thank you.